Welcome to our next panel for America's Future Series Dual Use Tech Summit, focused on SATCOM and data security in today's hybrid satellite ecosystem. For our industry, in my view, there couldn't be a more relevant topic and, frankly, a more compelling list of panelists than we have here today. I'll offer a bit of an introduction to each of our panelists, as well as a bit of context as to what we'll be getting into, and we'll turn to each of our panelists to say a few words about their role in the industry. We have with us here Pamela Arya, Vice President of Government Programs at Iridium, Janie Robinson, CEO of ExistX, and Michèle Beck, Senior Vice President of Canadian Sales at Telesat. I'm your moderator, Nicole Robinson, and I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Comtech. Just to lay the foundation here, when we think about commercial satellite ecosystem, it's no longer a single orbit discussion, nor is it even a single modality discussion. When we reflect upon our journey in the satellite arena over the past, say, 10 years or so, the advent of SATCOM and orbits other than geostationary has dramatically increased our end users' capabilities. It's empowered features like resiliency and redundancy from a multi-orbit, multi-network perspective, and has allowed our customers, both commercial and government, to shift to a posture where always on, always available network access has become more of a requirement and less of a nice to have as it was in the past. So when we think about modalities other than SATCOM today, considering geospatial, be it optical, synthetic aperture radar or SAR, RF mapping, AIS, the list goes on, there's a lot more going on at non-geostationary orbit rather than just SATCOM only. So not only have we seen an explosion in recent years in these capabilities at medium Earth orbit and at low Earth orbit, we've also seen the integration of these capabilities via data relay, optical links, and other means of creating a mesh network of data in space. During this same time horizon, and even more as recent as this past 24 months or so, we've also witnessed an increasing threat from a security perspective to these networks. Cyber and physical threats against commercial satellites are no longer a hypothetical discussion. Our adversaries around the world that we've seen in the last couple of years have demonstrated the intent and the capability to attack commercial satellites, all while in parallel developing offensive space-based capabilities. So given our subject today, SATCOM and data security in today's hybrid satellite ecosystem, I'd like to turn to each of our distinguished panelists here to briefly introduce themselves in the context of this theme and the companies that they represent. So let's start, Pam, if we could, with you first.
Hello, thanks, Nicole. So yes, my role at Iridium, I really focus on specialized needs of the government. So, tweaking our commercial offerings to meet the needs of various USG customers, and this includes, of course, specialized security requirements. So I think what I've seen is a more intense focus on this subject, as well as higher interest in more complex solutions, more robust solutions, and every year that pace keeps growing. Those kinds of very purposeful solutions for specific problems. So that's what a trend I've noticed in our company, and I think that's probably an industry-wide trend too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'm really excited to kind of dive into the solutions orientation versus the product approach as we get into our panel. Thank you so much, Pam. Janie, would you be so kind to introduce yourself and ExistX?
Absolutely. Janie Robinson. I'm the CEO of ExistX. It's really interesting to be on this panel. ExistX is a startup, and we started in 2023, which is not that long ago if you're looking at what the date of today is. But we are a spin out of a company called Galois that does amazing research in cryptography and building trusted systems, like software systems that are supposed to do exactly what they're supposed to do and nothing more. So you can think about security from the ground up. So a lot of what we are doing at ExistX is applying cryptography and applying advanced cyber that comes out of a very deep cutting edge and novel research space and bringing that into a more of a practical applications that can be utilized. Specifically, a lot of our focus is on the government sector, but also it is just as important in the commercial sector as well. So I'm excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Janie. And Michèle, if we can go to you next. We'll just have you unmute.
Sorry about that. So Michèle Beck, Senior Vice President, Canadian Sales at Telesat. I am responsible, as well as the team that supports me, selling into the enterprise as well as government markets. Telesat is a leading global satellite operator. We provide customers today with mission critical communications services over our geostationary satellite fleet. We do serve the enterprise, government, aero, and maritime markets today. And we're focusing on serving those same critical sectors on our new venture, which is called Telesat Lightspeed. It's a low Earth orbit satellite constellation. It incorporates technologically advanced capabilities, technologies to offer an enterprise-grade network services. And we've designed that constellation and those services from the ground up to meet some of the most stringent security requirements so that we can effectively serve our government and defense customers. And so we can talk a little bit about all of those capabilities as we move along in the discussion that we're really excited about.
Yeah, that sounds great, Michèle. We'll jump right into the questions there. The first one really around some of the developments we've seen in recent years in this domain, but even just with each of your introductions, a lot of that is coming forward. You know, we're talking about the Lightspeed constellation and cryptography and, you know, advancements in LEO, and even as recent with Pam's organization acquiring Satelles from a you know, fusion capabilities perspective. So really exciting. Let's start with our first question. Can you highlight some of the most important SATCOM developments as you've seen over the past 5 years? And importantly, what does it mean for the end users? Michèle, we've got you unmuted, so let's start with you.
Sure. So I think NGSO, non-geostationary orbits, have been sort of, you know, making their foray in a big way in this sector. There's a lot of programs that are underway, and it leads to increased performance, much lower latency, improved economics overall, true ubiquitous coverage, global coverage, including, you know, pole to pole, something that we were always challenged with when we talked about geostationary satellites. So I think that's, you know, a big development there. Certainly a major shift to significantly higher speeds, throughput capability. Everyone's looking at that. They're looking at solutions that will be comparable to terrestrial fiber. Interestingly, government now kind of relying more on commercial SATCOM services because we can move faster and often with more innovative technologies and platforms at lower costs. So that's a really interesting shift. Satellite-defined satellites, another big one, which allows us to drive a lot more flexibility in the offerings. The use of optical transceivers in space, again, which really helps us deliver in real time some of the critical information that is required, I think, to make these kind of snap decisions, both from a government military perspective, but equally from the commercial side as well. So those are some of the, I think, major initiatives.
Yeah, I think so too. And we'll go to Pam next too, as well. In particular, in context of the high throughput SATCOM that you mentioned, Michèle, and you also mentioned government continuing to rely on commercial. And I think it's an interesting thrust here to say government ought not do what industry can do cheaper, faster, and in a fashion that brings technology to government end users in a really fruitful way. So, Pam, what have you been seeing in the last several years in terms of SATCOM developments, and what does it mean for your end users at Iridium?
Well, certainly, Iridium was a leader in providing commercial SATCOM to the government. Probably the first organization to do that 20 years ago. And what we see now is, increasing diversity of that offering. So that's some competition for us, which we're, stepping up to the plate to offer diversity among our offerings itself, waveforms. But in terms of our recent new business line supporting the SDA, what we're seeing is, like Michèle said, a huge focus on optical and optical to ground. I think there's finally some solutions out there that provide very robust optical to ground data traffic. And of course, this really changes the data security landscape because optical is much harder to operate against. You don't have the same kinds of interference and capture concerns that you would have with RF. So I think that is going to rapidly change the landscape for threats to data in the next 5 years. The other focus we have, as you mentioned, Nicole, is P&T. With our acquisition of Satelles, we've been a partner to Satelles and a part owner for the last 10 years. So we've been focusing on this area, which is basically, denied environments and GPS jamming. What solutions are there in those situations? And we believe we have a robust offering for that now. And I think they're going to see even more people focused on bringing commercial or quasi-commercial government offerings to both government and commercial players to say, you're going to want a backup service when you're out in the field because you can't rely on GPS and both being there and being non-spoofed to you.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And in Janie's business as well, as you think about, enhancements to commercial products that are really driven by the needs of government end users. I mean, you talked about it, what role can PNT, position navigation and timing features, exactly. So for PNT features, how can that help in those GPS denied environments? What are some of the things that we need to think about from ExistX perspective that can help given some of those concerns?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'll answer the first question first, then I'll come back to that because there's some really interesting kind of novel ways of doing some multi-factor type authentications, which you can start to really have alternative ways to look at your position navigation and timing. But I think one of the most interesting things that's become a SATCOM trend that's really impactful to the end users, and this is both commercial users and government users, is the ability, this merging of the terrestrial waveforms, like having them go over satellite. So the ability to do LTE and 5G over satellite, and then have satellite, direct from satellite to cellular handset. I mean, that was the panacea for the government years ago, and it was just not really possible. And to be able to do that commercially now is huge. And I think that's just really going to change the whole landscape and the division between what's a satellite company, what's a telco company from a terrestrial cellular provider. And in doing so, when you start to merge those, you start to also weave in different layers of security challenges as far as, so when from an ExistX perspective, we're taking a lot of traditional cryptography and applying it in ways that it wasn't originally used. So we are applying this to data streams so we can continuously authenticate an actual data stream. How do you create new and novel ways to authenticate users? How can you do this in a way where if you are connected to multiple different communication pathways and you're in an environment where something gets disconnected, how do you continue at that edge node place to continue to enforce security and authentication? How do you use this in a joint environment? Maybe you don't, if you're using the same channel, maybe you want to be able to protect, your secrets, the credentials of your network from, the person that you're there with. So those are a lot of the things that we're focusing on. But, when I come back to one of the kind of the coolest things for the end users, I think a lot of it comes to bringing the commercial standards like cellular over satellite, and then seeing the merging of those. And then you add in the fact that you can do this over multiple different types of communication pathways, whether it's LEO, high throughput, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's really changing how you look at comms, especially from the satellite perspective.
I think that's right. When we think about that integration of terrestrial and satellite networks, the fusion of capabilities from multimodalities, sending geospatial data over high throughput SATCOM constellations, the PNT integration that's happening, all of that. The next question is really around, well, what's the impact from a ground segment, a ground systems perspective, and even modem technology? How must those elements of the satellite ecosystem keep pace with what we're seeing in the space-based developments? And maybe, Pam, could we start there with some of your thoughts on modem technologies and ground systems and how they might stay up to date with what's going on the space side?
Well, having just surveyed the landscape for building a ground system for a customer, I can say that there's a lot of diversity out there now, and I think optical is probably the least mature, as I said before. But certainly there are many players offering optical at some level of maturity between, say, TRL level 5 and 10. The main barrier I see right now to being able to interoperate and use these in a sort of enterprise ground system is basically the barriers to export control and CUI data. So to be able to use those, you have a very long lead time to be able to get that paperwork through, and I think that's kind of going to put a damper on interoperability. If every time you need to use that technology in a different country, you're going to have to get an export license. That's going to hinder that interoperability in building an enterprise ground worldwide.
Yeah, I think that's right. On the modem side as well, having the capability to have multi-orbit, multi-frequency, multi-modality, certainly on the part of Comtech, that's a big part of our development activity. How do we keep pace with all of this wonderful progress in orbit today? And Michèle's living that every day as well. I mean, for Telesat, being one of the leading providers of geostationary SATCOM for decades, will you replace your ground infrastructure every 15 or 20 years? Not so for LEO. Now we have to think about software-defined capabilities. How are we replenishing the space-based assets every 3 to 4 years? And what does that mean for the ground infrastructure? So your thoughts on that as well, please, Michèle.
Yeah, certainly. So from a Telesat Lightspeed perspective, we've designed the constellation and our satellites actually to have a slightly longer life than the typical LEO satellite. So the average life of our satellites will be 10 to 11 years. That's the design structure. So there's a little bit more stability in terms of the constellation itself. We are designing it, though, to be mindful that there will be an evolution, and so software-defined satellites, as well as the capabilities on the ground, so that we can do firmware kind of software upgrades as required to keep pace with some of the latest developments. The constellation is designed as a layer 2, so essentially transparent. It's like operating fiber in the sky. That is a big advantage, I think, for us and working with subscribers or our commercial as well as defense customers, because it allows them to use the encryption technologies that they're the most comfortable with, that are either proprietary to their operations. So it does allow for compatibility with a lot of their existing infrastructure. Where there is a little bit of a challenge, and we're hearing this from across the board from all of our customers, is they want to move away from parabolic antennas to the flat panels or electronically steered antennas. And today the technology supports essentially a single band. It might be multi-orbit, but it's a single band. And a lot of the customers are kind of eyeing multi-band, multi-orbit solutions. Now, it's early days in the deployment of a lot of these new NGSO constellations. And so that might change down the road in terms of recognizing that they want that much diversity in the network. Not sure, it's still early days. But if a LEO constellation is highly available, very resilient, secure, you may not need that much diversity, and you may not need to kind of tap into GEO, MEO, and LEO, particularly if the Lightspeed or the LEO constellation is fully global, and then has all of the right attributes to ensure that you can offer a very high availability, low latency, kind of resilient, service. So, it's something that is driving, I think, the customers to want that today, because geostationary satellites are not a full global solution. You can't reach the poles. So when you talk about aero customers, they're challenged. They can't fly over the poles. They need an alternate solution. Similar with our defense organizations, the constellations that they are using today are not fully global. And so they're, having to work with sometimes multiple providers as well as their own infrastructure to get a full global solution. Satellite capacity is still limited in some areas. And again, so they're having to tap in multiple service providers to get the connectivity that they actually need. So that might change in the future as we see more capable LEO constellations being built and in play.
Yeah, I suspect that's true. Interesting as well that you mentioned Lightspeed will be roughly 10 to 11 years on orbit. That's pretty impressive for a LEO constellation, but we might have to have a conversation there with MDA at some point about their business model. Do you remember in the early 80s, it used to be that you would buy chewing gum that would lose flavor like in 1 minute, 2 minutes, and the whole reason for that was so you'd buy more chewing gum. So anyway, we'll have to talk to MDA about it.
I just say space sustainability, though. It's like a good thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Janie, what are your thoughts there about some of those special features when we think about the ground systems, the modem technology, or other features that we hadn't talked about yet that have to keep pace with the advancements we're seeing on the space side?
So when I think about this, I'm really coming at this from the end user perspective. So while you all are providing the actual transport of the data, where ExistX is getting pulled in is really how do they move the data around, especially when they're operating in places where they don't own the infrastructure. One of the biggest challenges is how do you move the information over infrastructure that you may not trust. Data sovereignty is a big deal, especially when you're working with government customers. But now it's becoming just as important to commercial customers, to banks, and other places that want to make sure that they can trust the infrastructure they're working on. Some of the work that ExistX is doing right now is we've made some significant breakthroughs in working with software-defined networks. Some of the research that we've just been able to overcome, we're able to start working and mapping out networks and being able to dynamically in real time understand where the trusted nodes are within a network and help move the data across, from one maybe trusted point to another trusted point, even though you have to move that data over maybe nodes that you don't actually have control over. And that's pretty significant. So when I think about infrastructure, we're working with either the people that are providing the communications or the end users that are trying to leverage the technologies. So that's kind of the place that we're playing in. It's a little bit outside of the modem and the actual transport itself, but how do the users actually use it?
Yeah, and it's related to our next question as well. So I might keep it with you, Janie. When you're thinking about moving that data in a sovereign fashion across networks and infrastructure that you don't own and that you don't control, our next question here, what are some of the key advantages or challenges for that data protection in this hybrid SATCOM environment? And not even in just the SATCOM environment, but when we think about the hybrid environment where we're sending other modalities over that infrastructure in an integrated fashion. What are your thoughts there about some of those challenges with data protection?
Yeah, so when I think of data itself, to me, the data is the data, regardless if it's coming from a sensor or anything else. It's going to move across your network. Some of the things that we see are challenges, or how do you kind of formally verify that data is what it says it is? And so when I kind of go back to applying cryptography to these types of things. You can do encryption, but there's also ways that you can apply cryptographic techniques to actually only pass through information that is verified. So you can start to look at how do you put in place mechanisms to ensure that how you're moving the data, or the data that's actually there is the data that's supposed to be there. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. And I know that it's a much larger challenge when you think about the hardware side. If you have a modem that's connecting into multiple different satellites and you're trying to provide the end user the nicety of being able to have a single piece of hardware that can help them connect, I think that brings in and of itself, how do you do the authentication? What is the implication of zero trust networks or zero proof, even in the world of mathematics that I'm now in with ExistX and our sister company Galois. So I'd be interested to hear what both Michèle and Pam have to say, coming from their the I guess the optic of where they're seeing challenges.
Absolutely. Let's do that. Pam, if you've got some thoughts there, as I suspect you do, on challenges of data protection in your hybrid environment in Iridium.
So I think, I mean, one of the challenges with using encryption would be for services that don't have two-way transfer, right? So encryption inherently is expecting a two-way transfer to authenticate. If you're offering a data service that doesn't have that it's a one-way transfer, then you need some mechanism you need some mechanism that is not requiring that. And I haven't really seen anything that one could use that's sort of approved in to the extent that cryptography is, or some sort of encryption algorithm. I haven't seen that approved for use in a one-way transfer data situation. So that's something I think that we're always looking at. And then the other sort of protection situation, which I think you just alluded to, is like, how do you know that the person or entity or item presenting itself for use on your network is really who it says it is, right? Like, how do you know that that is a representation of authentic, or is it someone appearing to be someone else, or something appearing to be something else? So can you, if they have the right keys, and can you rely on that as that they really are that person? So I think that's another issue that has to be looked at. Yeah.
Verification of authenticity. Absolutely. Yeah. Is that a challenge that you're working with, Michèle, at Telesat, or some of the other challenges that you're seeing with data protection?
Yeah, so so I always refer back to kind of, how we're designing our Lightspeed constellation, because we are focusing a lot on security and on the capability, cybersecurity, and maintaining the I guess credibility of that data and protecting it. So, we've incorporated a lot of features in the constellation. One of the most important ones is use of optical intersatellite links. And so each satellite in our network has 4 optical intersatellite links that connect to each other, sort of the satellites on either side and the satellites sort of in front and behind of it. And so when we're offering a connectivity to a government entity, and they're coming up somewhere in the world, they don't need to go through any foreign terrestrial network. So they can come up in space. They will use the constellation itself as a relay through the optical links, and can come down directly at their headquarters without traversing a single terrestrial network. So that's something that governments and the defense agencies love as one of the features. Equally, we can do that from any geospatial spacecraft as well. So we've got the ability to use our optical links to interface into their satellites, spacecraft, and bring down that information in real time as well, without landing at any Earth station that they're not comfortable with. And so we can bring down the data directly at their facilities as well, their secured facilities. So we also, our satellites make use of digital beamforming antennas, as well as frequency hopping, fast frequency hopping. That means that the beams themselves are very narrow and can pinpoint to the specific terminals on Earth. It avoids any type of interference and potentially jamming of the signal, because you've got to be right under that footprint. And so that's another feature that we've incorporated to protect the integrity of the signal as well as the data from our customers. On top of that, I mean, it's all of the cybersecurity features that we're incorporating, and we're working towards meeting the NIST as well as IAPRE security checklist, and going through that to the extent that we can be as compliant as possible, and offering as much security and cybersecurity capabilities. Again, all of our facilities are backed up, and so we have main as well as backup facilities, including our main gateways to our POPs. And we will support private access stations for our customers that actually don't want to use any public facility at all to support the gateway services. They can own and operate their own facility.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too when you think about that, the sovereignty and the ability to have that direct downlink and that direct connection. When we think about, and we'll stay with you on this one, Michèle. A lot of perspectives here shared today about the different capabilities going up or in orbit. We think about the interoperability of those, or ways in which industry is working together or isn't working together in some examples to bring about hybrid networks. Now you get into a space where you think about the role of a closed system versus an open system in that dynamic. And I wonder if you have some views on that as well.
Absolutely. So we are certainly always striving to develop and support systems that are standards based, that just make sense. Interoperability is in fact critical, and we want to make it easy for customers to use the service. So we've, for one, overall in terms of standard, we've consciously have designed Telesat Lightspeed to be MEF 3.0 compliant. So again, a lot of our customers, we're wholesalers, so we deal with carriers and governments. They're used to purchasing services from the carriers, and it's fiber. So what we've done is we've designed our system to be MEF 3.0 compliant. So what that means is we're supporting from a technology interface perspective, as well as the provisioning, the commissioning of those services, so that it's more of a standardized approach. So it makes it easier for any one of our customers to configure, to provision, to procure the service from us. So it should be well known. In terms of, and I hit on this before, we are a layer 2 service offering, so it's transparent. We are relying on some of the standardization work that the government, DARPA, is doing. In terms of the optical intersatellite links, SDA compliant. I mean, we want to be able to interoperate with other satellites and bring down the data. So optical, to facilitate optical to optical communications. So that's certainly one area that we are also supporting, and we will be SDA compliant in that regard. DVB-SX, compliant in terms of some of the capabilities there. Layer 2, which offers that transparency, and MEF 3.0. So all in all based on standards, again, to simplify the service offering as well as the interfacing with customers.
So standards is one big way in which various members of the industry are preparing for hybrid capabilities and really interoperability, making it easy, making it secure. When you think about that, Janie, from a security perspective, what are you seeing in terms of how the industry is or isn't working together to bring these capabilities in a hybrid fashion forward?
I see just a huge push for software-defined networks and a lot of software-defined anything. So anything that you can, continue to evolve and configure to adapt to, a never-changing landscape. I mean, there's always seems to be a new, LEO provider or whatever. So if you're thinking about your interconnectivity, we're seeing a lot of software-defined networks, and along with the software-defined networks, that's where I'm starting to see a lot of the challenges in authentication, encryption. How can one organization share information with another organization without telling them everything, just what what's important in that moment? And a lot of those, so that's what we're seeing. So I'm really looking at it as on the merging point of it. From a personal perspective, I mean, I see a lot of, it's interesting seeing what organizations, like what commercial companies are working together and bringing joint offerings to the table. But I mean, it still looks very fragmented from my perspective, and I see companies building their vertically integrated offerings. So I would say it's hard for me to look at the SATCOM industry and see any kind of like real collaboration across the providers. So, but that gets down to a business decision, more than a technology position.
Or a use case position too. That's a very fair point. Are you seeing this at Iridium, Pam? Are you seeing more of a industry working together to bring forward these networks, or are you seeing more of the siloed approach?
Well, so our approach, from a business point of view, is we do have a lot of partners where we're primary to their service, or we're backup to their service. So on a one-to-one level with other industry players, we're building joint terminals or multi-use terminals that can use both our service or their service or switch between them depending on availability. But I do agree with Janie, that's sort of one-on-one and a business decision. So there's not like a methodology, I think, being put forth of how you would do that seamlessly without having those previous one-to-one connections. I think that one place you might see that change is in direct to satellite on when that service is rolled out on phones, given that it will be standards based. So that may change there, where it may not change for traditional receiver based technology. And certainly, I think not there yet, but coming in the future is satellite to satellite interoperability. But I don't, to my knowledge, haven't really seen that. Certainly not commercially, but I think it's coming, just not there right now.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's some very innovative programs along those lines on at least data relay, early stages, but it'll be really fascinating to watch that space over the next couple of years to see what capabilities are brought forward. So our last question here is really around who is leading the charge in terms of implementing hybrid satellite ecosystems today? Would you say that it's the government they're setting the requirements, or is it the industry, such as dialogue as we've had here today, to say, here are the things you need to contemplate, here's how we need, okay, I'm leading the witness, but let's start with who's paving the path here. Michèle, maybe from a Canadian perspective, what are you seeing? Is it the government driving the bus, or is it industry?
I think it's a combination of the two. Like I said, from the optical intersatellite link perspective, government definitely took the lead in that regard. And I think a lot of companies want to be compatible so that they can support some of the government programs. And so if you want to be part of that, you're adopting that particular standard. When it comes to other aspects, like I said, the MEF 3.0, that was industry, for sure. When we look at some of the RF capabilities, again, that was industry. So, it is, in fact, a combination of both. As a need, industry is driving some interoperability. When we look at Aero today, the configuration of using the modman so that they can easily flip between or switch between service providers. You've got a device, you've got a couple of modems, and then you've got the ability to switch. That has become a standard on aircraft today that just allows them to switch across various platforms. So in most instances, I would say industry is driving some form of standardization, but government equally is doing the same based on some of their own needs. And if you want to serve that market, you might want to look to what the government is introducing. If you're not interested in that market, then you're probably just relying on the commercial development standards.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Pam's opening remarks, where she talked about more of a solutions orientation, less of a put a product on the shelf and push it to your customer, more listening, what are their requirements, what are their needs, and then making sure that you're innovating along that path. So Pam, to that end, what are you seeing? Are you seeing a shift? Or are you seeing government really driving the bus, industry driving the bus? What's your perspective?
Well, I mean, I agree with Michèle. It's on both sides of the fence. I think certain areas like optical, clearly the SDA has driven that. And I think their demand for it has then spurred a lot of industry innovation. So it seems like a two-way street there. And I think in commercial, you see a lot of standards bodies that really driving the standard, which then allows commercial to innovate, knowing that there's a broader market. Because if you're going to put a lot of money into something, you want to know that there's a broader market, that you're meeting the standard for your that other people will be able to interoperate with you. So I think standards bodies help drive that interoperability, which then drives the commercial market to be able to serve a broader audience. So, but definitely, I think some of the really the demands from SDA has spurred the commercial market, and then you'll see that second order effects in the commercial market. Things that have been done for them will then show up as commodity later on in the commercial market.
Yeah, I think that's right. You have to measure, is the juice worth the squeeze? A lot of people refer to that field of dreams perspective. If you build it, they will come. Well, industry doesn't operate that way. You have to be able to size the market and make sure that the investment's going to be worthwhile at the end of the day. So, Janie, bring us home on this one. Your thoughts on industry driving or government?
I can't argue with either Pam or Michèle on that one. I would say the only thing I could add is, if you go back to the last question, we were talking about, how are people, is it a segmented, fragmented market, or are people actually working together? What I'm seeing is, what I think a lot of the requirements may be driven by the government kind of bringing those to light publicly. And the push a few years ago was really like the whole military SATCOM, commercial SATCOM combination. I've watched a lot of the commercial companies, their hybrid satellite offerings are really saying, okay, we're going to have a LEO, MEO, and GEO network, and we're going to offer, that global, different, throughputs of data anywhere in the world. And they're kind of doing that on their own. They're developing their own business models around that. But that really, it's kind of interesting to watch the requirements come from the government, the commercial, industry builds it, and then it feeds back in. So it's definitely a combination of both.
Well, I'm really grateful to have had this time with each of you. When you think about data security in today's hybrid satellite environment, I know, speaking for myself, I've not been privy to another session or another forum more compelling than this one here, and really appreciate all of your time and expertise. For the folks that are participating in America's Future Series Dual Use Tech Summit over the course of this week. These are the women in this industry that are frankly driving this technology to the customer base. Really compelling, thoughtful conversation. Janie, Pam, Michèle, thank you so much. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, Nicole.